From crazy hairstyles to parachute pants and penny loafers to grunge rock and flannel shirts, the 80s and 90s were 2 decades that left indelible imprints on the country. Eddie Murphy was killing it at the box office, and one future politician was blowing up things, left and right.
I'll be back.
And whereas on television it may have been possible for unemployed actors, waitresses, and part-time masseuses to rent large New York flats that realistically would cost a small fortune, reality was quite different. Housing costs continued to climb, and the long-term population of the homeless was increasing. Between 1970 and 2000, close to 9,000 low-rent apartments were demolished or converted. And during this period, very little affordable housing was built. Continuing to fight the good fight in the Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay areas, MidPen Housing was trailblazing the affordable housing industry and creating firsts across a wide array of strategies and practices. Guided by the visionary and compassionate leadership of Fran Wagstaff during most of this time, MidPen would enter the 21st century as not just a leader in its region, but a leader nationwide.
Fran Wagstaff, who was director when I was there, was one of the first on the block to look at the tax credit program, try to figure out how to make it work with the preservation issue, the properties that developed in the 70s and then coming out of affordability in the early 90s. And Fran was one of the first on the block of getting nonprofits to acquire those properties and preserve them. In fact, one of the properties I worked on was Tyrella Gardens, which was a preservation of an old HUD 236 property. That was just so typical of MidPen, always being the first this, the first that. Fran was looking at tax-exempt bond structures that a few other nonprofits had explored, and she was doing properties like Timberwood and others with bond structures that were innovative. So that's always been MidPen's MO, and then Matt Franklin has taken that to additional levels and just continued to grow and expand.
MidPen really was a pioneer in making affordable housing resident-focused from the very beginning. And I remember that in the first developments that I completed for MidPen, the then executive director, Fran Wagstaff, made it a point. All of us showed up when it was move-in day for our residents. We helped them carry their couches, their furniture. We talked to them about where they'd come from. We got to see their tears of joy as they moved in. And that wasn't the end of Fran's interest. Would typically bring childcare facilities, things that were obvious. But then Fran began noticing, and MidPen started noticing, how a lot of the school-age kids needed things to do after school. So Fran pretty quickly realized that MidPen needed to invest in first setting up computer education programs, and she found she had staff who were interested in doing this. And ultimately, I became the first director of services when most nonprofit housing groups didn't yet have service divisions back in the 90s, because it was so important to MidPen that the homes they weren't just about physical homes, they were about the people in them and helping them succeed. And I think Matt Franklin and the rest of the team has kept that tradition going and growing. Now, MidPen has really gone from being a regionally, locally based developer to having the statewide national impact. And I think that's a real testament to how MidPen has grown over these 50 years. So hats off to you, MidPen.